But yes.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome to a slightly different version of Monday Night Live training because obviously we are not live right now and it's actually not Monday right now. But I wanted to have this particular guest come on because I was presented the opportunity to invite her in to speak with you guys about a subject that I, quite frankly, do not know a whole lot about. Her name is Coach Breanna Price, and she is a hold on, nutrition therapy practitioner. And she is a U.S. Army veteran and very smart. She has all sorts of different initials that she gets to put behind her name. But she specializes in helping ladies who are going through autoimmune disorders. And I know that that is becoming such a prevalent issue in society now, whether people realize that they've got them, they're newly diagnosed, they're trying to overcome, or they are in remission and want to ensure that they don't end up continuing to have problems. So I am going to hand the floor over to Brianna and let her introduce herself and then take over.
Thank you, Michelle. It's good to be here. Good to talk to you. Yeah, I will only talk about those qualifications, and I don't. My most exciting thing I learned was my certification for nutrition. There's things that I've done, they were awesome, but they were not helpful for diet, lifestyle, the that kind of preventative approach. And then when talking with doctors and endocrinologists, they always talk about there's nothing that you can do for your autoimmune disease. And I don't, it's not true. It's not true with research, and it's not true with giving people power back in their own life. So I'm glad that you said remission because some people will say that they can help you cure your autoimmune disease, and that's not true. It's we can put it into remission, then that's awesome. And you want to make sure it stays in remission, but it's not something that just goes away forever. It still needs to be something you're concerned about if you were diagnosed with that. So I saw all of your questions that your group had put in, and thank you for having those questions and asking them. There's a lot of ways we can go when talking about autoimmune disease and what causes it and all those things. So having an understanding of what your people are looking for is really important. Um, so autoimmune diseases will develop due to a combination of genetic predispositions and environmental triggers. And when I say triggers, that's stuff like a chronic infection, like Epstein-Barr, Lyme, or crazy enough, gut dysbiosis. Um, the crunchy community calls it leaky gut. Now the professional medical community calls it intestinal permeability. The overall same thing with it is we have tight junctions between our cells, and they're supposed to be really, really tight so nothing can get through. And whether that is toxic exposures, food problems, chronic stress, we're going to talk about stress a lot. Uh, Food triggers, we can say trigger in that, all of those sometimes will start loosening those tight junctions. And when that happens, food particles, viruses, immune markers, they can get through those tight junctions and just wreak havoc in our body. And we're going to talk about some food options, and then I can talk about later why those are problematic. But the back to the causes. Toxic exposures, pesticides, heavy metals, BPA's, plastics, stuff like that, chronic stress, and then hormone imbalances. When I'm saying hormone imbalances, I'm referencing, for the most part, estrogen dominance. If you, a lot of women can have estrogen dominance, and even if you have PCOS, which is pretty common for a lot of women, you can also have estrogen dominance if you have constipation. So, if anyone listening to this, yep,
That was me.
it gets you. Yep. If anyone listening to this has any constipation, that's the first thing they need to address is what's happening with that chronic constipation. And that's not taking laxatives every day. That's the wrong answer. It's good for a short time, but it's the wrong answer for your long term and for your health. Um, since we're talking about gut, we can go into the gut. So how does the gut pay kind of play a role in our autoimmunity? So they talk all the time about the gut brain axis now, how a lot of our immune systems in our gut, we have serotonin producers in our gut. Our gut does a lot. It's really powerful, and it's a good way when we're dealing with hormone issues, perimenopause, autoimmune stuff, to first address what's happening with digestion, gut health, all of that. We talked about the leaky gut with the they compromising the gut barrier or leaky gut or intestinal permeability. Those are all of the terms that are used. But this can have where like you have undigested proteins will enter the bloodstream, toxins, and then an interesting one. So most women, if they have an autoimmune disease, they've developed Hashimoto's. So there's a couple of things. Statistically, Hashimoto's is the most common autoimmune disease among women. And then if you have one autoimmune disease, people are more likely to develop others. And it seems like, for the most part, the mechanisms that are happening in that is we have these immune markers in our body. Our immune system is overexcited, overactivated, attacking our own tissue. And we also don't address that leaky gut. So, stuff like gluten. I talk about gluten with Hashimoto's people a lot. Gluten, sometimes dairy, but mainly gluten, can act as a molecular mimicry. So it looks like thyroid tissue. And so when you're having an autoimmune attack and all of those immune markers are attacking the tissue in your thyroid and other body tissues, if you have gluten in your bloodstream, it will increase the amount of attack that has to happen because your body's thinking, I need to protect myself. I need to get rid of this. And so, with a lot of people, if they have Hashimoto's, the removing gluten and sometimes removing dairy will help calm down that attack within their body. So, there's less immune markers being distributed, thinking that they have to attack. So, it just stops that attack on the thyroid. But it's called molecular mimicry. And I'm using Hashimoto as an example because it's the most common one. And then, so what do? We talk about gut health. We want to heal our gut. We want to heal those tight junctions. We want to stop the constipation and all the digestive distress. Um, Food is really helpful. Stress is really helpful. And I mention it a lot because stress impacts every aspect of our body. And so stuff like collagen, bone broth, probiotics, anti-inflammatory foods, soluble and insoluble fibers, those will all help in different areas in small ways as the collective to help with your gut health. And don't worry, I have a list of options for you all as part of a handout for this. But I'm gonna go back up to my list so I'm not forgetting anybody's questions. Lifestyle impact for autoimmune disease. So I will have this in the handout as well. Lifestyle is really impactful and really valuable when you're addressing prevention of an autoimmune disease and also pulling that into remission. So we talk about lifestyle, but what does that mean when we talk about lifestyle? We talk about stress at first. Stress and inflammation are the root of like autoimmune diseases, and inflammation is like the big one. That's the root of autoimmune diseases. It's also the root of most of the chronic diseases we have in our country. And when I say our country, I'm referencing like the industrialized world. Inflammation is a huge problem. So how you address your inflammation is we have to address our stress, and we also have to address our diet. Stuff like the ultra refined, highly processed seed oils, those aren't helping you. The ultra refined vegetable oils, those aren't helping you either. Those have inflammation markers. And if you're like, well, why? What does that mean? Um, you have omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. Those are totally natural and totally healthy in ratios. And when we're talking about getting more omega fatty acids or the omega-3s, and we don't mention omega-6, is because omega-6 is naturally occurring, but it's in a very small ratio in the food that we eat. And in the ultra processed foods, like those highly refined seed oils, it is a higher concentration of omega-6 to omega-3. And the omega-6 is a indicator of inflammation markers. And so if you're having a lot of um, digestive issues, period pains, because that's still kind of part of what we got going on. If you reduce the omega-6 in your diet, it's going to drastically induce those pain receptors and inflammation markers within your body. It's one of the first things I do. We're not talking about endometriosis, but it's one of the first things I do with someone with endometriosis. We drop those omega-6. So that is a really powerful, really impactful food option on reducing inflammation. And then uh, with stress. So stress is hard because sometimes we can't change what our stressors are in our life. We just have to change how we respond to them. And I like to think of that in how you feel that pressure associated. And because there's some people, two people in the same job, one will be thriving and one will be crumbling. And it's the difference in that is how they are feeling and embodying that pressure. And so journaling can help. If you love journaling, if you hate journaling, there's other options. So many people hate journaling.
So many hate
Um,
journaling.
so many hate journaling. And when I personally hate it because it feels like we are, we have so many tasks in our life and I can't handle one more task. And it feels like a chore. Um, so
Like
that's why I
homework.
hate journaling. It's more homework, but a pretty effective tool that I found with helping with just that chronic daily stress. So a lot of us will do stuff on a weekly or monthly basis to help reduce our stress levels. But in the constant connectedness, the busyness culture we have, that's not enough. And we need to be able to do something every day that can help calm down those cortisol, calm down our stress response, our feelings, our breathing. Um, and so for my clients, we do legs up the wall or legs elevated on a pillow, but we do 5 to 10 minutes before bed. You can already be laying in bed, do that legs up the wall, and then you can't see my tummy, but like deep belly breathing. And just that small period of time, doing that for 1 to 2 weeks, they start feeling a difference in their overall like stress feelings in their body. So that's helpful. And then daily movements, I wanted to talk about helpful and supportive movement with autoimmune disease. A lot of us women get stuck into the burn boot camps and cardio with weights and hit training. And I do love CrossFit. I love the community, the people, but doing 5 to 6 CrossFit workouts a week is not going to help when you have an autoimmune disease. It's not going to help at all, at all. So I like to talk
Can those
about,
types of things actually make your symptoms worse?
yes, 100%. And the reason why it makes it worse is the exercise and cardio, building muscle, all of those have an inflammatory response, and that's a good thing. The chronic, constant inflammation is really the problem that people run into. But the shorter, smaller doses of inflammation that would be from like 3 lift days a week um, has a different response in your body as opposed to the every single day, and you have that high intensity movements that are expected with that.
Mhm.
So it's the inflammation and then also the cortisol that is released in those workouts. And so cortisol is kind of a buzzword in the health
Yes.
community. And I think it's a buzzword now because we're all realizing collectively that we're too stressed.
Hmm.
But yeah, so that's I don't like to call food good or bad. I don't like to call movement good or bad. We want to find something that is helpful. And those high intensity workouts aren't helpful when you are managing an autoimmune disease. What is helpful is strength training and depends on how you perceive stress, how you recover from it. So this is very bio individual. Um, how how long the workout is, how your sleep is, how you're eating, all those things. 1 to 3 days a week of strength training without the cardio is very helpful. And then the rest of the time, just that daily healthy movement of walking and yoga, mobility, stretching, those are all good because we're using our muscles, which is important. And we're also keeping that stress lower, which is the biggest part of why we need to do those things. And then the environmental toxins, that is another way that lifestyle can impact good or not good, helpful or not helpful. So when we're talking about exposures, that's a lot of people will have too much stress, too little food, too over exercising, and then they're not realizing that they're having all of these exposures from every aspect of our life. And so as you're starting to address your autoimmune disease, I think the first step that people should do is look at their food. And when I say food, of like, what are we heating our food in and what are we eating off of? So stepping away from the plastics when we're heating our food or storing our food in plastics. Glass is a little bit more expensive. I know that can be tough, but um, a lot of people get overwhelmed. And I'm noticing that as I'm spending more time talking about all this with people, is like the list of things is so overwhelming. So
Yes.
if there's one thing that you can change and you feel like you can tackle one thing, address your food and how your food is being stored and how it's being eaten, heated up, all those things. And when you're ready, then approach your personal care products. When you're ready, approach things like laundry detergent, stuff like that. So it doesn't have to be all at once. And um, we talk about stress a lot. And the reason I'm saying it doesn't have to be all at once is the stress associated with trying to do everything perfect and everything all at once is more problematic than just waiting a month to take it out.
Precisely. And I mean,
Yeah,
you saying that it doesn't
I
all
get
have to be
it.
done at once. I mean, I've been doing this almost 5 years. I finally started transitioning us to glass storage
Mhm,
probably 6 months in. So I'm 4 years that I have slowly been transitioning everything. We're almost solely glass, but I still have Rubbermaid in my cabinet, guys.
mhm.
Like, just because it's better to do it. Yes, I store cold items in the Rubbermaid. I do not put anything
Same.
hot in there. I do not heat up anything in there. Everything gets warmed up. But I'll stick my husband's freaking cheesecake in a Rubbermaid. It's okay. The keto cheesecake I make him.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be done immediately. Yes, it's scary. Yes, there is a lot of dogma out there about you have to fix everything immediately. You have to get these things away from your home. Do what you can a little bit at a time because, yeah,
Mhm.
you can't stress yourself out.
And it's so expensive. It's
So
so
expensive.
expensive.
Yeah.
I recently started switching hand soaps. So I was diagnosed with autoimmune disease in 2014, and I'd had a couple years of it was Hashimoto's of the symptoms, and I was told by every doctor, endocrinologist, all the things we were going through, fertility, reproductive endocrinologist. They were like, nothing you do is going to make a difference. So I started researching, and I didn't change the food containers first because I was so overwhelmed by all just the list of things that like this is gonna poison you, everything's gonna kill you, which is the phrase that everyone's saying now because it feels like that everything's gonna kill me. And so I was too overwhelmed. I didn't change anything for almost a year because I was like frozen in I don't know what to do,
Yeah.
which is hard. Um, but it gets better, I promise. So, environmental toxins, lifetime instant impact, plastics, pesticide, mold. If you're, this is something, so I work with a lot of veterans. It's something within my community that's a little bit more unique, is those toxic exposures based on deployments. But it's even stuff like if you work with someone who does long distance trucking or is out on the road all the time, those fumes, diesel fumes, those can be impactful. And I don't say that as a way to cause a bunch of fear, but it's helpful to understand what is causing these things so you can say, oh, okay, what can I do to help with that? And
And
by
I'm
the way,
glad you
ARS,
brought that up. And I hate to
yeah,
interrupt you, but my husband's also he's an Air Force vet, and you guys had the burn pit exposure overseas,
hmm
which is just it's blowing up with vets now who
yeah,
are just the things that are coming out about the burn pits. He is an aircraft mechanic, so he still works around jet fuel. He's working around
hmm
JP8. He's working around hydraulic fluid. He sits in freaking fuel tanks. Like,
hmm
there's a reason why I am so diligent about what he eats because
hmm
of all the environmental exposure he has in his life.
yeah, yeah, and this will help you too. IR saunas are really helpful for the diesel fumes, those airline fumes, that kind of like exposures, pull out. Also, people sweat out heavy metal exposures through IR saunas, which is cool to know. Yeah, the all the toxic exposure stuff. I was a medical service officer in the Army, and my responsibility was when I was deployed was to be like managing surgical teams and hospitals and bringing them into theater, all the fun things. But I was in the process of learning about BPA's and plastic, and that was like I was trying to manage one thing. So I was like, I'm going to manage my drinking water. And then I deployed. And then I realized that they have these huge pallets of water that is all individually bottled water, and it sits in the sun for months to years.
Yes.
And even if it's not in direct sun, which they almost always are, it is in that high heat because I was in Iraq. And I was like, this is not okay. We can't do this.
Yeah.
But there's no other option. So it's kind of the sometimes people run into toxic exposures. There's no other option. You know, it could be problematic, but you just got to do what you can do and address it later on. But yeah, those water bottles, I was like, are you kidding me? Can we
Yeah.
at least cover it with a tarp or something?
Can you pretend to care, please?
Yeah, please, anybody. No, I went around like a crazy person and I was like, cover these up, move them inside. And everyone was like, oh my God, shut up. It's just warm water. It's not just warm water.
Oh,
Um, Anywho.
we
So
digress.
yes, I wanted to go on to more of the questions. So there, one of the questions was, is there any new information to help with fibromyalgia? The first time I heard about fibromyalgia, it was 2008, 2009, and one of my neighbors had it, and she was just said, "There's nothing I can do. My doctor doesn't know anything. I'm just in pain all the time." And I was like, "What do you mean you're in pain all the time?" That's a really hard one because it's pain perception cannot be measured. And so that's a hard one for a lot of people. Um, but it's a central nervous system disorder. And then people in the research is understanding it now as a neuroinflammation and mitochondrial dysfunction. And I'm glad we're talking about this one because mitochondrial dysfunction is a big thing for some autoimmune diseases, but then also stuff like low testosterone. A lot of that's an increasing thing. So a lot of these women here, I'm sure a lot of them are married or have been married. And as that's rising, I mean, that's the male population. I'm talking now with 20-year-old men that have testosterone in the 100s. And I'm like, what do you
Yes.
mean you're 21? So mitochondrial dysfunction is a big deal. And there is and I'll go over them, some supplements that can be helpful for mitochondrial dysfunction. But red light therapy is really cool. So, red light therapy, Juve and Noom are the top brands that I've seen that are actually therapeutic grade red light therapy. A lot of people can get swindled in that because the third party testing is really important. It has to be the right wavelengths, but it also has to be the right intensity, like light intensity. And then per the manufacturer, you have to know how far away to be from the light to get that therapeutic grade. And so in looking at all the brands, Juve and Nume are the top ones that I've seen that are third party tested, and Juve is like a class 3 medical grade device. Um, but what they do is they affect specifically mitochondria. And we all know that mitochondria, it's powerhouse of our cell, it's where our energy comes from. Every cell has mitochondria in it, plural. And what happens in there, so we all have oxidative stress. It's a normal part of the human experience of processing things through our body. Oxidative stress isn't bad. It's when you have too much oxidative stress, and that can be from inflammation, unfortunately, inflammation and toxic exposures and not having enough nutrients and I mean the list goes on. But when we have too much oxidative stress, the mitochondria can't do what it's supposed to do. And the red light therapy affects on the cellular level the mitochondria. So when people are saying it helped with my skin, it helped with my hair growing back, it helped women will shine it on their thyroid, it helped with my um, like I use it and it is like shrinking my thyroid nodules. I've had a couple biopsies, which really suck, and they're so uncomfortable. They're so uncomfortable is not the right word. It's painful. But I've had a couple because I had a nodule that just kept growing and it was at a concerning exponential rate. And I've been doing the research and I was like, I'm just going to try it. What do I have to lose? It's now shrunk by 20%, which is crazy. And it's like because it's a nodule, because that's a growth, there's definitely more research that needs to happen with that. I'm not saying this has any implications with other growth things. I'm saying what's happening to me. But red light therapy is effective, and it's effective because it works on that mitochondrial level. So that's how that can help with fibromyalgia. And then
That's fascinating.
do what?
I said, that's fascinating.
Isn't it cool? I love research. I can spend too much time on all of the research platforms, and learning how to read research is its own beast of understanding. But once you do, and you can understand like the methods and all the components inside research, I don't know. I go into it.
Oh, heck yes.
But some of the supplements that can be helpful. So food is, oh, I love to do food first, and I'm sure you do that as well. As let's focus on the daily behaviors and food,
Mhm.
always really valuable. Sometimes supplements can be needed, and that's if like we can't obtain it very easily through our diet, or if we need higher like dosages for that quick therapeutic effect. But CoQ10 is helpful. Magnesium and L-carnitine are all helpful with neuroinflammation and mitochondrial dysfunction. And then some functional medicine doctors are using low dose naltrexone, and it has been gaining traction as a therapy to reduce inflammation and to like moderate the immune response. Naltrexone is, I think that's the one that helps with alcoholism. And when looking at, because it's been around for a while, when looking at that, the dosages are really high when being treated for that. But for an immune response, it's more of like 2 milligrams. So it's definitely a really low dose. But that's been used recently with some functional medicine doctors. And then lifestyle strategies for fibromyalgia, of course, sleep, reducing stress, balancing our blood sugar, and of course, that inflammation. And that was what we listed before. Blood sugar is an interesting one. Um, Most people, I think the number is over 50% of Americans have either insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes. Like it's becoming a pretty big problem.
Mhm.
And the I just checked my time. Just I didn't want to ramble on forever. But that's it's interesting because that can be some pretty big wins is for a lot of what people are going through if they're having a more stable blood sugar throughout the day. That can be some pretty big wins for weight loss, inflammation, their sleep, their how they perceive stress. It's very helpful. The next question. Someone asked, what is the most common autoimmune disease in women and what are those symptoms? So we talked about Hashimoto's. It's called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. That's the most common autoimmune disease for women. And then a lot of the symptoms can be overlapping with other things. So if it's something you feel concerned about, you should always talk with your doctor. But fatigue, weight gain, hair thinning, brain fog, depression and anxiety, cold intolerance, and digestive issues. And when going to a doctor and having that diagnosed, they have to test the TPO antibodies. And if they're only pulling your TSH, that's not a
Yes.
um, that's not quality health care.
Yes.
And I have had this fight with many of providers. I have a great provider team now. They're wonderful people. They actually test for things. But it took years to get even diagnosed with Hashimoto's. And I remember going to the doctor and saying, I'm so tired. Like I didn't want to hurt myself. So when I'm bringing up the fatigue, I'm bringing this on purpose because this is a really big one where the women are like, this is not fatigue. This is like, I'm so tired. I'd want to crash my car just so I can take a nap. Like,
Mhm.
I don't want to hurt myself. I didn't feel depressed, but I was so tired. And I would tell my doctor that, and they're like, well, you need depression medicine. I'm like, no, it's not that. I feel the difference in my body. So that's a big one for people. And then like the cold intolerance, that's another indicator of where you can say, okay, I think this is definitely Hashimoto's as opposed to other things that could be fatigue, hair, weight gain, all the stuff. Um,
Sounds like perimenopause. Hey.
yeah, yeah, like it can overlap with so many things. So this is not saying like if you're tired, it's Hashimoto's. That's not saying that. But the cold intolerance too is a weird one because like I started tracking basal body temperature for fertility, and women can do this even if you want to stay off hormonal birth control, but you want to avoid pregnancy. Same thing. And my temperature was like 96.8 or 97. And I remember telling my fertility doctor, and they were like, that's not true. It can't be that low. And I'm like, no, I'm telling you, it really is that low. So those are some ways where you can measure that. And if that's something where you can do for free. Like you just have a thermometer and your basal body temperature is when you first wake up, don't talk, don't drink water, don't open your mouth, just put the thermometer in your mouth, get that temperature, record that for a couple months, and that will show you what your basal body temperature is. If it's consistently low, that's an indicator that there's something going on with your thyroid, and that is 100% you can take that to your doctor.
So here's a good question because I hear this all the time. Well, my labs came back normal.
Mhm.
So what do you
Yeah.
recommend to somebody who is told your labs are normal, even if they actually test more than just the TSH? They're normal.
Yeah, that's find a new doctor. And I have done the same thing. That so I get mad at normal because normal in our country is sick and broke and tired. Like I don't want
Yes.
to be normal. I want to feel good. So
Preach.
right. So functional like, it's hard because the financial threshold to get to a functional medicine doctor is a hefty one. That's really hard. So sometimes doctor shopping has to happen and it has to be someone that will do the test and is curious with you. Hormone clinics are a little bit lower of a threshold where they're not doing functional medicine, but it's a lower financial threshold to get in the door and get tested and have somebody look with like a base level of curiosity of what's happening with your body. Um, I like to say just because it's normal doesn't mean it's optimal. I know a lot of people say that now, but like your TSH is a good example. It can be four, and I forget the measurement, milliliters of deciliters or whatever,
Mhm.
but it can be up to four before they're like, hey, your TSH isn't doing great. But if you're looking at fertility, it shouldn't be anywhere near a two. And you can be at a 1.5 and have pretty severe symptoms. And so hormone doctors often will treat the symptom, which is great. I do understand the uh, reticence to immediately give hormone medication, whether it's T3 or T4 medicine. Oftentimes, with our body, if we're getting the hormone supplemented, our body's like, oh, great, I don't need to make as much. So I understand how that could be concerning, but the problem is somebody's feeling terrible. Their labs are told it's normal, and
Mhm.
then they're like, just wait until it gets worse. And then they're also told that they can't do anything to change it. So that's like, oh my God. Um, so if you're in the process and you feel like someone's not listening to you and you're trying to get those answers, there is stuff you can do on your own at home while fighting the good fight of figuring out what's going on with your body. And it's always stress management, reducing inflammation, supportive exercise, and a nutrient dense diet. And then in my handout, I'll list like foods that are supportive foods that can be helpful for um, gut health and just basic nutrients that women need. But yeah, that's like you can do stuff on your own. Keep fighting, but oh my God.
Yeah. That's
What's
my thing
the
with my clients is just because it's normal doesn't mean it's ideal. Like it's
Yeah,
there's a big freaking difference between America's normal and ideal. And ideal is what used to be normal back in the day, and now we're all so freaking sick that
yeah,
normal is not normal.
yes. Everybody's sick. It's so frustrating. Um, yeah, I could go all day on that. I just get so mad. But like even with that, and I use the example of like our menstrual health and perimenopause, even into menopause for a little while, we all still have a cycle. It's frustrating, but there's so many times where an OBGYN will be like, oh, that's common. Common doesn't necessarily mean that that's healthy. And common doesn't mean that that is good for what your body is. Common doesn't mean that you should be living that way. Because like what what our cycle should be, we should not be in pain every month. And if we have pain in our cycle, that's something that needs addressing. And there's often where we go in and women are discredited with their pain and told that it's common, it's not that big of a deal, whether it's crazy endometriosis that's wreaking havoc on your body or simple cramps, it's still not supposed to happen. So that's like one of my favorite examples of being told it's common or normal. And that does not mean healthy at all. And
100%.
yeah.
100%. I had
And another,
horrible,
like,
horrible pains my entire life. Like
yes,
I would be laying on the bathroom floor at age 16, 17 years old, throwing up because I was in so much pain. And oh, well, that's just how it is. And then
same.
I turned 42 and I changed how I started eating. And I have not had a single day of pain since with regards
Yes.
to my female anatomy. Like that wasn't normal. In all those years, it was, oh, that's just how it is. That's how your mom
All
was.
those
That's how you're
years,
going to be.
all those years you suffered and you
Yep.
didn't need to.
Needlessly, yes.
Yeah, it's that's rage inducing in itself. And um I something that helps me not be angry with many doctors because I worked with them in the military. I have family that is a doctor, and I don't think people go into it intentionally trying to discredit women. I don't think they intentionally go in to not provide care. But it helps me approach them with the appropriate level of expectation of doctors are diagnosing a disease state. And so if it hasn't reached that disease state threshold that they've been taught, they're not taught what to do before that. And they're not really taught much in nutrition. So they have a lot of knowledge and a lot of value, and they are good at what they've been taught to do. But that before disease state, some of the lifestyle factors that do make an impact, they weren't taught that. So
Mhm.
it helps me have a little bit more compassion when I'm like sitting in rage.
Yeah, they're
And then
there to
sometimes,
fix us once we're already sick. It's not to prevent us from getting sick. They're there to, just like the mechanic in your car, they're just trying to diagnose it. They're doing the diagnostics, trying to figure out
yeah,
what's causing the issues, not this is how we prevent the issues. Make sure you change your oil on a regular basis.
yeah,
That's just not what they're
yeah.
taught.
And there are really terrible people that just slip through the cracks, so that definitely is not accounting for everybody. But it helps me approach them with the appropriate level of like expectation of what I'm going to get from them because I know that when I go, I'm going to get a prescription and they're only going to want to talk about the disease state. And it's hard because we have to learn a lot on the back end of support our own bodies, but that's where coaches come in.
Mhm.
Uh, so nutrition, how does nutrition and movement affect autoimmune diseases? That was another question. And we talked about eliminating inflammatory foods. That can be things to include gluten, dairy, refined sugars.
Sugar.
Yes, the
I say
refined
this
sugars.
specifically because of who asked this question.
Mhm.
Sugar.
It sucks, but it's true. Yeah, and they're the interesting thing. So, sugar alternatives or those 0 calorie sweeteners, they can be good for certain things. So, there's studies where it shows that people who have more of those 0 calorie sweeteners will eat less overall through the day. So there are some things with that. The problem is they do cause inflammation within your intestines. And when we're talking about autoimmune disease and intestinal permeability, we're talking about inflammation. And so in thinking of that, if someone's having a hard time with like, oh, I really love my Diet Coke, or which a lot of people do. It's fine, it tastes good. But if you're thinking about foods that are helpful to help you achieve your goals, then that might help you say, like, hey, this isn't going to help me achieve my goal of coming out of this autoimmune disease. This is going to help me achieve my goal of reducing that systemic inflammation. So I want to choose something that supports my goals. It might help. Anti-inflammatory diets, AIP, if that's necessary, and Mediterranean can help. And then nutrient-dense foods, we talked about omega-3s. Those will always be just beautiful and perfect. Vitamin D is also a really big one. Selenium, which is great for thyroid health, and zinc are all critical for immune balance. Selenium, if you are supplementing selenium, you do not want to also have food sources high in selenium. Like Brazil nuts are a great example. You can't have too much. So that's like one of those caveats of if we're focusing and finding something in food, selenium, let's get it through whole food. But if we don't want to do whole food and supplement because you could have too much. And then we talked about movement and overtraining, spiking cortisol. So strength training and walking and yoga, all the things. uh, Someone asked a question of how does diet affect MS and low vitamin D? So MS is strongly linked to vitamin D deficiency. Studies are showing that vitamin D levels reduce MS risk and slow progression. A lifestyle impact that can help with MS if you, so it depends on like how severe. But there are studies that are showing that whole body cryotherapy helps with so it does help with whole body inflammation, but it helps with the pain associated with MS. So if anyone in your community is concerned about it or has a family at risk, I'd encourage them to look into whole body cryotherapy and to just see if it might work for them because it can be really helpful. Um, it's different than cold therapy, like in the cold plunge. Sorry. They're both cold therapies. Cold plunge is a lot cheaper, which is nice. So it's a lot cheaper threshold to entry. But if someone has anxiety or migraines or an autoimmune disease, the whole body cryotherapy is a better option for their body. So it just depends on what you have going on and what your goals are. Unfortunately, it's not as cheap as cold plunge.
Yeah, that's what I got my pool out there for during the winter.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
in the desert. My pool is still 45 degrees, so it does actually get cold here
Yeah.
sometimes, people.
Yeah, that's freezing. No, hard pass.
And I just have to
Hard
go
pass.
in. I just have to jump in and sit there, and then I'm like, why did I do this? And I'm
Yeah.
questioning myself for 4 long minutes, and then I get out and
Yeah.
I'm like,
But then you feel better and it's annoying.
yes, yes,
It's like exercise. When
the
I'm not
struggle.
feeling motivated, I'm like, I don't want to do this. And then I make myself do it. And 15 minutes in, I'm like, wow, this is pretty
Okay,
nice.
this is great. This
Yeah.
is fantastic.
I feel so much better. So diets rich in anti-inflammatory fats. We keep going back to those omega-3s. We got avocados, olive oil, nuts, seeds. So perimenopause, even into menopause, beforehand, fertility, all the things. Seed cycling is a pretty gentle approach that can happen in supporting your hormones and your health. And that's just it's pumpkin seeds and flax seeds in the first part of the month, and then sesame and sunflower seeds in the second part of the month. And they're just they're healthy fats and they're nutrient dense, and they're a great way to add that into your diet without feeling like you're taking a bunch of supplements and stuff. And then the next question was, how does the environment play in autoimmune diseases? So we talked about the toxins being a potential trigger of that, and mold exposure, pesticides, heavy metals. IR saunas are awesome. And so I've read all the studies, and my husband and I have a wellness studio, and we have IR saunas there. And we were like, okay, we're gonna have a good brand, all the things. And I'd read the studies about people detoxing heavy metals through their skin. And I was like, I mean, that's really cool, but I didn't really believe it because I was like, this can't be real. Um, so all toxic exposures in the military, all those things. I started doing the IR sauna, and I literally, no joke, started sweating out black shit. And the first time I was like, I was dirty. This can't be real. My skin was dirty. And so I've started showering beforehand, and then there is like droplets of like black stuff coming off my arms and my legs. Like I'm actually sweating out those heavy metals, which is just wild. So it does work.
That's
And
amazing. Wow.
yeah,
And how
I
scary at the same time, too.
isn't that weird? Yeah, because and so I've been working for a long time, pulling myself out of that autoimmune disease. When I was diagnosed, your antibodies need to be lower than like zero point 0.9 or zero point zero 0.09, and I was at like 900 and like 80. They were really high. And I have over the years gradually reduced that, but it takes a long time. And since I started doing the IR sauna, my antibodies dropped by 100 points. So, like, it does work, it is impactful, and you really do sweat out heavy metals, which is gross too.
Oh, wow.
And then detox support. So, since we're talking about detoxing, uh, saunas, lymphatic drainage, liver support, I did want to be cautionary, and I'm sure you talk with your clients about this of don't do the diarrhea tea, the
No.
diarrhea pills. You're not, I promise you're not detoxing.
Hmm.
So our livers are amazing and they do over 300 functions a day. They detox medications and toxins and they process foods and metabolites. Like it's amazing. And when we're not able to detox what's inside, it gets stored in our fat. It gets just stored in our tissue. And when we do a detox, if we aren't using our detox pathways, so that is defecation, it's urine, respiration, the heavy breathing and exercise, our lymphatic system. Which one am I forgetting? Lymph, breast, pee, poop. Man, on recording too.
No, I think you got them
There's
all.
five of them. Okay. Well, maybe it's lymphatic too. I don't know. There's five
Yeah.
detox pathways. If we're not sweat, there we go. Wow.
Yeah.
Sweating.
Well, and we're automatically thinking sweat because you're sweating out black shit. So there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like, if you're not actively, if those pathways and mechanisms aren't working, so if you have Hashimoto's, you're less likely able to sweat. Most people with Hashimoto's, because that cold intolerance, they don't sweat. So you need to start sweating. That's really important. If you have constipation, that needs to be addressed. If you have constipation and diarrhea, or if you have diarrhea, that needs to be addressed. So the five detox pathways have to be working effectively. And then you can move into a liver support and that stuff like milk thistle, dandelion root tea, and those are helping to support your liver, but also to package up those metabolites. So when they're pulled, those problematic metabolites, when they're pulled out of the tissue, and then recycled into our bloodstream, we can get rid of them in the appropriate pathway. If we do a detox tea, if we do the liver support, and our five pathways aren't working, those metabolites aren't being able to exit properly. They're wrecking havoc again in our bloodstream, and then they're being reabsorbed. So detox is really important. Detox teas are not.
And on the subject of sweating, please do not use antiperspirants.
Oh my God, please don't.
Allow your armpits to sweat. You can use
Yeah.
deodorant. Do not use antiperspirants. They are
Yes.
supposed to sweat. If you get sweaty pit stains, oh well, guess what? That's what a natural part of your body is.
Yeah, we absolutely have to sweat. It is so critical. And heavy metals, we have exposures to them. Like if we cook with foil, unfortunately, that's a heavy metal exposure. And we have almost daily impact of some type of heavy metal exposure in our lives. And I mean, people are finding out that like certain brands of protein powder are problematic. So when you're learning these things, there, I understand there's a little bit of fear. I have problems with that too, of like, am I doing the right thing? But it's I'm also making sure to support those five detox pathways every day. And that helps me know that, like, even when my body's having inner encounters with things that it shouldn't be, it's able to get rid of them. Um, you can use bentonite clay in your armpits. You can like rub it in and do like a detox mask for your armpits, and that can help with some of the obnoxious smells.
Yeah.
The last question I had was, do cell towers impact our bodies? I have not studied a ton on this, so it is very general in what we're talking about. So EMFs, we're talking more about them, those electromagnetic frequencies. We get them from our phone, we get them from our Wi-Fi. Then we have 4G, 5G, 6, 7, 8, 9G. We have these huge cell towers. So there is an impact. I think the extent of that is still being researched. But a lot of people talk about how that increases oxidative stress. Well, we already know we can support that with red light and a couple supplements. Those can worsen autoimmune issues. And so, a couple strategies that's not going to, I was listening to a podcast 2, 3 weeks ago, and I forget her name, but she's very big in the wellness space. And she says that she has like a mesh canopy netting over her bed of like a metal mesh to block all those, which is cool, but most people don't have the money for that. And it's
Right?
probably right. So, like,
Or have a hyperbaric chamber in their house. Yeah, you like
yes,
most normal people can't afford those things.
I met someone 2 weeks ago that has a hyperbaric chamber in their house. And I'm like, people can't afford that. So things that like I'm constantly thinking on what's the lowest threshold to entry? What's the like smallest amount you can do to start getting answers and making an impact? Because most of us are kind of struck with money, and I'm not buying a mesh thing for my bed. It's not happening. But what we can do, so we can put our phone on airplane mode or turn it off, whatever you have, when not in use or at night. So the charging the phone next to your head, sleeping with the phone in your bed. Those are things where that is that constant, you never have a break from that, and that can be problematic. So I have my phone that's across the room, and it's my alarm clock. My baby is really my alarm clock, so I don't actually need an alarm clock, but it helps me actually get out of bed and not hit the snooze 12,000 times. And then some people do like EMF blocking phone cases. I read about that a little bit, but again, how much money does that cost? And then another option you can do, again, lowest threshold, cheap, is to turn your Wi-Fi router off at night. And a lot of people are saying that that's helpful. I don't know exactly. But that was the best I could answer that question.
N equals one. You got to see what works for you.
Yeah. So I have a list of supplements that can be helpful with reducing inflammation and repairing the gut. And I also have lifestyle support. So the red light therapy, why it helps. I have food, like a list of food sources based on that. So if people are like, I don't want to spend a ton of money on supplements, I have those. So I'll provide that to you in the handout for your group, and hopefully that helps them get started and helps you guys continue your journey.
Oh, absolutely. Well, this was awesome. And see, you didn't even talk too much. It didn't feel like it was that long.
Oh, that's good.
You had no, because you had a lot of really good information to share. So I'm, as long as it takes to get the message across, it's okay. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, we got a lot of great information from Breanna tonight, today, whatever. We're pretending it's Monday night. Okay, there we go. Breanna, where can people find you?
I'm on social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, Radiant Roots Coaching. I have a website, Radiant Roots Coach, just coach, because the domain was taken for another one.com. And I have a Facebook group, Metabolism Mastery. And if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to help. And Michelle, if you have any questions with your clients, I'm always happy to help. I got into this because I want people to feel better. And if that means that it's a question at 10 o'clock at night and I'm awake, I'll answer it. If I'm not awake, you wait till tomorrow.
And I am going to add Brianna to our Facebook group so that she's in there. Just like I added Jen to the group when she did the hormone class, I'll add Brianna in there and I'll list her as a group expert as well. So that, yeah, if you've got questions about autoimmune stuff, again, that's something I do not specialize in. I've never had to deal with any of it. My doctor actually does have me getting a full thyroid workup. Next month when I go in for my labs because things
Okay.
are just a little out of whack. And hearing Brianna
Mhm.
talk about certain things, I'm like, maybe he's onto
Oh,
something. I am
uh-oh.
very lucky that I have a doctor who is as thorough as he is, but yeah, not everybody has access to that. So we'll see how it comes. And so I might need to talk to Brianna about what's going on with my
Yeah.
thyroid. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
Let's talk.
Absolutely.
There's a lot that we can do in our lifestyle. And I think that's if you take anything from all of this, like being diagnosed with an autoimmune disease or thinking that you have one is scary and it's overwhelming because you're thinking, my body's attacking itself. I'm on medication for the rest of my life. that's scary. Like that's a big feeling that's hard to deal with. Um, the good news is whether it goes completely into remission or not, there is 100% lifestyle activities that can impact how you're feeling and impact that day to day. So maybe you have to be on a medication, maybe you have to be on a low dose thyroid medication if we're talking about thyroid. But there's stuff that you can do. You're not powerless, and in something that feels powerless and scary, it doesn't have to truly be that way. Like there's some things we can't control, but there's a lot that you can. And I just want people to feel encouraged and not like, oh my God.
Well, this is exactly why I had you on. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
coming on
thank
and
you.
giving us the information you gave us. And I know there's going to be people in the group that are benefiting from it, and then the folks on YouTube, they'll see it as well.
Yeah, I love it. Happy to help.
Thanks, Brianna.